All right, today's class is going to take us about a half hour, and it's just going to be a why the hell do I want you to write papers? Basically, I think many teachers tell you to write papers, and not many of us take time to talk about what it is we're looking for and why we think it's useful. And I just think it's worth pausing and asking yourself, why is it that you are writing a paper? So the first question, and I'm opening this up as so the first question is why write papers? The second thing is going to be what makes a good paper in a very general sense. The next 4 classes, we're going to be talking specifically about how to write papers for this class and argumentative writing more generally. And then the third thing we'll do is what type of papers for this class and just the most general descriptions of what that means. So starting off, well, let's ask the question that nobody ever asks. Why write papers? Why do teachers ask you all to write papers? And I mean this isn't a trick question. It's literally you've been asked to write many papers. Why?
To demonstrate your understanding of the subject.
Demonstrate understanding. Now, why is it then, if it's just about demonstrating understanding, what is it that writing a paper does that doing a test does not, or that a homework does not? What is it that the paper does to demonstrate that the others don't quite as well?
I think it takes more skill to write a good essay than to just memorize whatever you need for a test.
So yeah, so that part of it is it's about, for a test, you can just memorize facts and things, and we can all forget them. But when you're writing, you really have to understand things so you can put them into your own words. It takes a lot more understanding. I mean, a parrot can repeat the exact correct phrases, but to put them into your own words takes a level of understanding. So it's one of it is to make sure that you are understanding, you get some topic from the semester that you've engaged with. So that's part of it. Why else though? If it was just about demonstrating understanding, I think a lot of teachers would be like, well, you know, papers, it's a lot of grading. I'd rather demonstrate understanding in another way. So what else? Why else do we want you to actually go through the writing process? Think about what's going on in my head. And I mean, it's not entirely sadistic of just wanting to torture you all.
It promotes creativity.
So yeah, it's about, it forces you. So one thing that writing does is it forces thinking and creativity and forces thinking, creativity, and sharpening of mind. So basically, when you're writing, you are really having to come up on your own with the best way to construct something. You are literally producing a long thing of your own, and you have to think through how to do that. Through the process of, and you also have to hold in mind the things you've thought about before, the things that are going to be coming next. It's a process of sharpening your mind. It's working on creativity, because many things in the world are not just a matter of regurgitating what you're told. There is a lot of, in a job setting, a boss doesn't want somebody who does exactly what they tell them to do. They want someone who does that, but also anticipates problems before they come about. They want you to recognize, without having to be told every step of the way, to take initiative. And for that, you need a level of creativity, and paper writing and practice that sort of thing. Why else? What else is it about specifically writing that's worth doing? Why is it writing as opposed to the other ways? Like, we could do oral exams, and that would force you to think through things. What else is it about writing?
It creates a bigger attention span.
So that's part of it, is a bigger attention span, but more, and I think you're all giving it like the very sophisticated answer. Another simpler answer of, it's something that takes more attention span. And because of that, it's something that's worth practicing so that you get better at, well, what's something you're gonna, writing. That's the other thing. Writing is designed to be practice, because at the end of the day, whether you get an A or a B in this class is not going to decide your future. But whether you write something well for a boss to convince them to hire you, whether you write a report that they decide you should get a promotion, whether you do something in an email that ends up deeply offending someone because you wrote it so poorly. Writing is something that matters. Think about how is most communication done these days? Like, what is the main form that you use to communicate with bosses, friends? Well, not friends so much.
Email.
Bosses,
Text messages, emails.
text messages, or
Email?
email. Yeah. And what is an email except writing? It is literally a written form. What is a resume except something written? What is a cover letter for a job? Something written. What is a report that you have to give? Something written. So most things in a job setting, many of you will have a setting in which you need to use writing skills. And the better and more clearly you can do that, the more success you're going to have. So it's not just writing to prove these things. The reason I want you all to write, honestly, for me, demonstrating understanding is far less important than practicing writing and forcing yourself to sharpen your mind in the specific way of practicing writing. If you forget every single detail of the theories we talked about this semester, that's normal. Like, there are so many things you learn in college that end up leaving your mind. However, if you've practiced writing so that the next time you have to write something, it's a little bit less scary or you feel a little bit more confident in it, then, and specifically something in a job setting or an application setting, then I've done what I wanted you to get from it. So for me, it's the practicing of the writing and practicing a specific type of writing. But all right, so the next question I want to bring up. So why write papers? Those are basically the things. Nothing special, but that's why we want you to do it. All right, the next question is, let me erase the things other than the one in the middle. I'm going to leave my pig too, because I like it. What makes a good paper? And I intend this to be a trick question. I intend what makes a good paper good, I guess is a more grammatical way of putting this, or what makes something a good paper. And I intend this to be a trick question because I genuinely believe there's no such thing as a good paper, full stop. A paper is good or not, depending on what it is you're being asked to do. Because at the end of the day, there are many different types of writing. And what you're being asked to do and what counts as doing it well depends on what you're being asked to do and how well you do it. In the same way of speaking, whether you are being asked to do a rap versus convince the US Senate of something, what counts as good at rapping and what counts as good for a US Senate speech are very different, or a wedding speech. You could give the greatest Senate speech, like the Gettysburg Address is considered one of the great speeches of all time. But imagine giving that at a wedding. It'd be terrible. So it matters what the context is and what you're doing. Same thing with paper writing. Whether something counts as a good paper depends on what type of writing you're being asked to do and what specifically the task you're given is. So before we do anything else, let's talk about what are the different possible tasks you could be asked. Or another way of putting this, what types of writing are there? Just so we can separate, because what makes one good is not going to be the same as what makes another good. So what are just some types of writing you might engage in or be asked to do?
Writing a letter.
So a letter, yeah. And so what is the point of a letter? What is the goal of a letter? What makes a letter good? Well, actually with a letter, you can kind of think it, again, is going to depend on what you're trying to get across. So let's say like it's a letter to grandma. What's going to make a letter to grandma good?
Easy to read.
It's easy to read. Yeah, you don't want to use huge words for grandma if she's going blind. You also don't want it to be too long. She doesn't have too much time left on earth. You don't want to waste all of it with your letter. What are some other types, more generally speaking? So letters are actually like in terms of format, but in terms of different styles of writing. So analytical writing. So what do you mean by analytical here? So that is one. Analytical. What do you mean by analytical, Amanda? Because it is a type of writing, like a biography report. Yeah. So analytical is just analyzing something and breaking down what happened. So a lab report or an analytical report is explaining what happened and why. And it's a very specific type, but this type of analytical writing, in which you're just describing what happened, can more generally be called. So I'm going to put analytical as, and what we find here is there's various general types, and then within that, there are smaller types. So I'm going to actually make a little chart here. We've got writing generally, and then within this, you have what can be called descriptive writing or informative writing. And within this are going to be things like lab reports, where the goal is just to describe to someone what happened. What are some other types of, and the goal of descriptive or informative writing is just to describe or inform, provide true statements. So what will be some other examples of descriptive writing?
News article.
News. Yeah, a news article would be another form. What is the point of most news articles? It's just to give you the facts about what's happening somewhere and maybe why those facts came about in a causal way. So for instance, there's a fight going on in this part of the world, why this nation invaded that one. That is descriptive writing. Other sorts of things are many nonfiction books are descriptive. So like a biography. Now, it might have a more general point, but like a biography or an obituary is, generally speaking, all you're doing is describing the facts of someone's life. What are some other general types of writing? Or another thing is, what's another reason that a person might write something, generally speaking, other than just to inform?
Humor.
Humor. So humor, or more generally, any sort of entertainment. And so one thing you can go is just humorous writing. So anything that's funny, and what's the goal is just to try to get someone to laugh. And so you can think of that, and yeah, engaging writing. So humorous ones. What are some other types of writing or reading for entertainment?
Gossip, like the magazines where you, well, not now, but like, yeah.
So magazines, I think, depend on what the magazine is. But if it's a story or a book or something that's like, the New Yorker tries to be both entertaining and informative. And it's also that way. So they can blend together. And as we'll see, so they don't all line up perfectly, but generally speaking, there are certain types of writing, though, in an extreme sense, where all you're trying to do is entertain. And so another one, depending on the type of magazine, just stories. If you're reading just a fiction book, if you're reading a science fiction book, that's not trying to tell you facts. The Game of Thrones is not trying to tell you a true story about some dragons. It's trying to entertain you. Also, poetry. Poetry is trying to get you to feel something. And by poetry here, I include within here hip hop and any sort of written word that's presented in a way that is trying to get you to feel a certain thing. So right now, you've just got give information, entertain. There's a third big type. And this is the third type, is the one that we're going to fall into. Is that a hand over the shoulder?
No.
Okay. Anyone know what the third type is? I could just tell you some facts. I could try to entertain you or make you feel something. But what else might I be trying to do? Yeah, argumentative, which is under the more general category of persuasive. The third main thing I might be doing is trying to persuade you of something. I write something down to try to get you to accept a certain conclusion. And within that, amongst other things, there's going to be argumentative. And this is what the type of paper we will be writing for this class is. But before we talk about what goes into this, you can start to see how what counts as a good paper is entirely going to depend on which of these many things you're being asked to do. If you're being asked to write a news story, it doesn't matter how funny it is if it isn't true. If you're being asked to write a story, it doesn't matter how true it is if it's boring as hell. If you're asked to write poetry and it makes nobody feel anything, even if it convinces them that global warming is real, it's not a good poem. So it entirely depends on what you're being asked to do. So just generally speaking, whenever you are given an assignment, you have to ask yourself, what is it that I'm being asked for? Am I being asked just to describe something that happened in the lab? Am I being asked to make someone feel something or laugh? or be entertained? Or am I being asked to persuade someone of something? So whenever a teacher asks you, before you know what you're going to do, what good writing looks like for this particular task, you have to ask yourself, what am I being asked to do? So that's the first thing you should just like, and many people just want to get the paper writing over with. And so you just sit down and you start typing. But if you do that, you end up very often wasting your time because you end up making it much harder on yourself. It's better to slow down, ask yourself, what am I being asked to do? And then take it from there. So we are now going to forget every type of writing except for argumentative writing, which is what we are going to be focused on in this class. So what then is argumentative writing? As the name suggests, it's a type of writing that is based around an argument. And so the best way to think of argumentative writing is it is trying to get someone to believe a certain conclusion by providing them with reasons they should believe it. So you can think of it as in paper form, one of the arguments we talked about at the start of the semester, where each part of your paper is a premise that is arguing for a very particular conclusion. So what that means is, so the best way, it's an attempt to get a reader to accept a very particular conclusion by giving them reasons that convince them. So this is the definition. Now, if you can't read this, I'm going to say it all out loud. But the key to recognize with argumentative writing is also, if it is this, there are things it is not. And argumentative writing is not just stating your opinion. For instance, if I'm writing a paper that is arguing that, so imagine I wrote a paper that's arguing that global warming is real. It's not an argumentative paper if I just say, I believe global warming is real. All that's doing is describing how or what my opinion is. It only becomes argumentative writing if I tell you reasons that you should believe global warming is real. So for instance, we have every single year, it's the highest average temperature on record. And the simplest explanation for this is the greenhouse gases we create. Therefore, you should believe global warming is real. That is in an argumentative writing style. If I were to write all that out, that would be argumentative writing. Also, argumentative writing is not just saying true things about a topic. So it's not just saying there have been more wildfires in California in the past 5 years than in the past 5 decades before that. That is a fact. It is true. It only becomes a reason for your argument if you go further to say something like, the reason there have been so many forest fires is because the temperatures have been higher. Therefore, the existence of forest fires shows that climate change is real. That's what takes saying true things. It only becomes an argument when you take the true things you say to prove a point. You can think of another one. Michael Jordan won 6 NBA championships is a fact. Michael Jordan won 6 NBA championships and never lost. Therefore, he's the greatest basketball player of all time. That's an argument. It's not just saying the true things. It's taking those and using them for a purpose. Lastly, it's not just a matter of telling me the history that you have that led you to believe something. It's not just about what caused you to. So for instance, I believe in global warming because my dad raised me with the importance of global warming from a young age. That is not an argument. It's only an argument if you say, I believe in global warming and you should too, because of this evidence and this evidence and that evidence. So that's the key. And now what we're going to be doing, so that's the general bit of what makes argumentative writing, what it is not. We are going to be talking about this stuff for the next 3 classes after today. So you're going to be beaten over the head with what these look like in practice, how more specifically what I'm looking for that's good and bad. But this is just the general sort of what is argumentative writing. And so what I'm going to be looking for your paper is basically how well do you try to convince me of your conclusion? Not just that you state some true things, and not just that you state your opinion, and not just that you tell me how you came to believe it, but rather that you bring up things that explain to me why I should believe what you're saying. And you explain exactly how it is that the things you bring up are able to convince me of that conclusion. So even if at the end of the day, I don't agree with your final conclusion, I recognize that the things you brought up together provide support for your conclusion in a way that is persuasive to me. And again, we're going to talk more and more about what this looks like in practice.
So argumentative paper imply that the reader has an opposite stance.
So it does not, but here's the best way to think about it. The best way to think about it is imagine your reader, and I'm going to be talking about this more. Imagine your reader is a complete moron, like an absolute fucking idiot, and has never even heard of most of the things you're talking about. They are the average person who has they're very dumb and they're very uninformed. If you aim for that audience, the goal is to convince that person. If you could convince that person, you're writing in a way that anybody else could understand as well. You basically want to force feed your reader why they should accept your conclusion. And so if you assume they're super stupid, then by the end, anybody's going to be able to follow along and see, oh, this leads to this, this leads to this, this leads to this. So you don't have to assume they automatically disagree. You rather have to assume they're so stupid that they never even thought of the topic before, which is in some ways harder. So generally speaking, what I think one thing to keep in mind then at the end, and I'm going to write this down again and again and again, or I'm going to bring it up again. I'm going to put this up right now because it's something I believe firmly. Writing is hard. I don't believe there's anyone who finds writing easy. I think my guess is the people who say it's easy for them are lying, or have forgotten how long it took them to get to the point that it got easy. Writing is difficult. So the main thing I think with writing is go into it knowing this is not a natural thing for humans to do. For most of human history, most people were illiterate. Most people could not read and write. Therefore, what this task is not something that comes naturally. So if you are struggling, the easiest way to make writing hard is to get these second order feelings about writing. So what do I mean by this? Well, you could be writing something and you might have the thought, writing this is hard. Everyone has had this thought. Very often though, as soon as you have this, and I think many people don't admit the fact that it's difficult, and teachers will say, just write a paper. And therefore, the moment you get to this point that it gets hard, you start having this second order feeling. By that, I mean, here's the first order, it's down on the ground. And then second order means like the next level up. And then you start thinking something like, I'm a terrible writer. Or I'm an idiot. And the key thing, this right here, so to go with something from what we talked about, writing this thing here is hard to I'm an idiot is a very natural way for a human mind to think, and it is completely invalid reasoning. This, that you are finding a certain writing assignment hard means nothing about how good of a writer you are and nothing about how intelligent you are or anything else. This stuff is hard. So the one thing also I want to stress is don't beat yourself up if at any point it's difficult. I'll talk about some of the tips I've used throughout this that I find to make it less stressful, just because I think everyone who has to write finds it stressful. And so do not add to that this feeling of you're inadequate or it comes naturally to everyone but you. It doesn't, it's hard for everyone. It's hard for me. It's excruciating for me at times. I've thrown my laptop across a room in frustration before. It happens to all of us. And I think another way to frame this of why it's so hard is I really do think, don't think about writing as putting your thoughts on paper or anything like that. The best way to think about writing and why it's so difficult is it's actually a really complicated task. And I think the best way to think of it, time traveling mind control. Now, why do I think that the best way to think of writing is literally as time traveling mind control? And I don't mean this metaphorically. I mean quite literally, the act of writing is a way of traveling through time to control someone else's mind. Because what are you doing when you're writing? You're producing a bunch of scratches on paper, the goal of which is for somebody in the future to read this thing and for them to think what you wanted them to think when you wrote that thing down. If you're trying to write a humorous piece of writing, you are hoping that someone in the future has the laughter response that you wanted them to have. If you are trying to inform someone in a news article, you're hoping that the person who reads this in 12 hours, in that future person who doesn't even exist yet because they are happening in the future, is able to have the thought that you wanted them to have. So this is why it's difficult, because to do writing well, you have to ask yourself, what is my goal? And then you have to ask yourself, given that goal, what do I need to do so that this future person has the response to what I put in front of them that I want them to have? And this is why people don't talk about it this way, but this really is what you're being asked to do. You are trying to put on paper something that future me reading this is going to know what you're talking about and feel and understand what you wanted me to understand when you put it down on paper. And so it's not a matter of just putting what's right now. It's a matter of you thinking about what I'm going to be thinking about when I get the thing in the future. And if you can keep that in mind, I think it helps in two ways. One, it'll remind you of how to succeed. The way to succeed is present me with something that will allow me to understand what you meant. And also, it'll help you remember this shit isn't easy. Don't beat yourself up when this gets hard, because you are having to imagine what's going to happen in somebody else's mind about what's in your mind right now. And that is a very complicated process. So that's all I really wanted to say today. And so what we're going to be talking about, that was the theory stuff. Practically speaking, you have, I believe, this class, which is now ending, and then 4 more classes after this. I believe that's accurate. You have 2 next week and 2 the week after. I think that's true. Basically, what that means is today, done. Next Tuesday, we are going to talk, generally speaking, about what is the main claim you'll be arguing for your paper and how you go about constructing one of them. That is the thesis. Next class, we're going to be talking about theses or theses. Thursday, we are then going to talk about how you go about turning theses into a structure for an argument. And a thesis is just the one sentence description of the claim you're going to be arguing for. You will have a homework on thesis assignments due on next Thursday, so a week from Thanksgiving. And all this assignment is going to be is 8 sentences, 8 individual sentences. And basically, I've given you 4 possible topics to write your paper about, and each of those has 2 possible positions on it. So there's 8 possible things you could argue for in your final paper. And I just want you to think about what would the thesis that is associated with each one look like. You will be graded on whether you tried to accomplish it. It's going to be pass fail, and as long as you give it an honest attempt. And the main goal is to force you to look at the paper prompts a little bit ahead of time and just practice writing what a thesis looks like. Then Thursday, we're going to be talking about outlines and how to turn a thesis into a longer paper. And you will have an outline assignment. So basically, you'll have 2 very short assignments. One that you will do between Tuesday and Thursday, and another one that you'll do between Thursday and the following Tuesday. And then on this day, we'll talk about, once you've got an outline of basically this paragraph will be what should go in the first paragraph, what should go in the second paragraph, why should they go here? Then the following Tuesday, we're going to talk about how do you turn an outline into a full paper? How do you take this and turn it into something that is not just going to be a matter of, outlines can be in bullet point. How do you do it in full sentences? How do you organize paragraphs? What sorts of things do you need to convince to get into my head to prove to me that what you're giving is a good reason for your conclusion? And then the final Thursday is basically going to be a well, I haven't even figured out. We'll find something interesting to talk about this day, but it's not going to be, there won't be reading. There won't be anything like that. The only thing basically that you'll have to do for the last Thursday is show up and say goodbye. All right. The other thing, I will say this much more later, but I know that these sorts of things can stress people out about papers. I just want to make clear, I'm very lenient on a lot of the sorts of things that some people care about. So I don't care about the method of citation you use, as long as if the plagiarism gods came down from above and said, did this person plagiarize? I can say, no, they did not. They have the URL here. Other thing, I do not give a shit about spelling. You've seen that all semester. I don't care about grammar. You can try to use periods just because it's good to practice, but if you didn't have a single period in your whole paper, as long as I could figure out what you're doing. I do care about paragraphs because they correspond to how you're thinking, and I'll explain that. But, you know, you can spell you like that, I don't care. You can spell R like that, I really don't care, as long as I know what you're talking about. I also know a lot of you, English was not your first language, so I'm not gonna punish you because you don't speak in the way that the stupid books say is proper English. I don't give a shit. I'm not going to care. So spelling, grammar, and I'll talk about some other stylistic things. The other thing I want to say, and this is one that people often ask me about, the paper page limit, number limit, word limits. I'm going to say this repeatedly, but I'm going to start by saying it now. I have assigned you a 3 to 5 page paper. That is a suggestion. 3 to 5 pages is a suggestion because I have used prompts that are similar to these all for many years. I changed them up. I have used different ones, but they're all generally written so that the length that you would need to write a successful paper that is not you. So basically, what I find is any paper that is below 3 pages, it's very often too short for the person to actually accomplish what I want them to accomplish. And generally, it's not a good paper. Also, for papers that are longer than 5 pages, it's generally the case that a person is repeating themselves and it's not concise and clear. That said, I will never take off points simply because you are above or below the page limit. I have given A's to 2-page papers. I have given A's to 10-page papers. It's entirely, if your paper is 10 pages because you cover everything in perfect amounts of detail and don't repeat yourself, that's an A. If you manage in 2 pages to say anything you need to get your point across, everything you need to get your point across, and you're just a very clear, concise writer, that's okay. So don't look at this and think, oh my God, I'm at 3 pages. I got to make my periods white and invisible and make the font. I don't care about that. So that's just the last few things. Now, you all have a little homework over Thanksgiving. That's to enjoy yourselves and catch up on sleep and get a little rest and whatever else. I have nothing more I want to say today. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns, feelings, anything? And again, we will be talking about this in excruciating detail over the next few weeks. The only thing you should do before next class is just look at the paper prompts, just glance over them. And even if it's just sitting like when class starts next week, just like glancing over them. We'll talk about them in class as well. But if no one's got any other questions, all you've got to do is go home, get yourself some sleep, and that's that.
Thanks, Professor. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving.